Baseball season is upon us, right? And some of you do not care one bit about that, but some of us do. And one of the newer traditions in baseball is this thing called the walk-up song. The hitter who approaches the plate has the opportunity to tell the people behind the scenes his favorite song. And then as he walks to the plate, they play a few lines of his favorite song. And it's really cool because if you're in the ballpark, if you're on TV, you don't really hear this. But if you're in the ballpark, even the Bisons do this where they play the favorite song of the player coming up. And you can tell a lot about the guy by just a few lines of the song that he chose. Like there's hip hop, of course. There's a lot of Latino played. There's some good hard rock played, which is one of my favorites. There's country music, and there's songs of praise. There's believers in the group, and they have some songs of praise. You hear all kinds of stuff. It's kind of one of those things that just kind of blends in until you make the connection. This is this guy's song, and it's really cool to hear. Like Aaron Judge, the home run king for the New York Yankees, his walk-up song is something called Mo Bamba. Casey and Linda probably know about Mo Bamba, but that's not my thing. I don't know that, but that might be their style of music. Mike Trout, a great player for California Angels, Los Angeles Angels, his favorite song last year was something called Super Gremlin. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Not me, but I listened to it. But I asked Rick to play the favorite song of Edward Diaz. He's a relief pitcher for the New York Mets. And at the end of the game, when they need their best pitcher, their saver, to come in and save the game, the gate opens up and Edward Diaz walks the field to the mound with this song playing. Thank you, Rick. It's not every church that has the opportunity to have a guy like that play a song like that. Thank you, Rick. Now, you can imagine about 40,000 fans on their feet as this guy comes in. He throws the ball 100 miles an hour, and he's already pumped up coming into the game, and then the trumpets sound like that. It's like, whoo! The adrenaline goes through him, and off we go. Well, I'm going to ask you this morning, if you were the batter, you were walking up to the plate, what would be your walk-up song? There's all kind of options, right? What would you choose? I want you to kick that around on the way home. Just think about it and tell the people you rode with what would be your walk-up song. I am sure somebody in this room would go, hey, hey, let's go Buffalo. Somebody would probably choose that. I asked Jordan what would be his walk-up song. He really surprised me. He said he would go with the old Elvis Presley song, You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. No, he did not say that to me. I'm kidding. He did not. He did not say that. I think if I was choosing, and you can only get a few lines in, you can't get the whole song in. I think I would choose, Oh, the Overwhelming, Never-Ending, Reckless Love of God. If I could somehow get that in there for just those 10 seconds so everybody could hear it, that would be cool. But I would really like to know what walk-up song you would choose. So when we're done, I'll make a list, or send me a text or something, but I would love to know. We're in the final week of a series called Listen to the Music. It's been enjoyable for me. Mitch, thank you for preaching last week. This message comes from the book of Psalms. They all have. Today we're looking at Psalm 18. And I think this might be the song that David chose as his walk-up song if he was a batter coming to the plate. It's definitely his fight song, describes his life song. He spent a lot of time on the battlefield facing one daunting enemy after another. And he describes how God helped him be victorious through all of that. Now, the song's found in two places in the Bible. It's found in 2 Samuel chapter 22, and it's almost identical in Psalm 18. The title in Psalm 18 gives us the setting for what this is about. At the beginning of some of the Psalms, there's just a little note or a line that says the setting, and we're blessed by that today. It says, "For the director of music of David, the servant of the Lord, he sang to the Lord the words of this song when the Lord delivered him from the hand of all of his enemies and from the hand of Saul." So this is kind of toward the end of his reign. Psalm 18 has 50 verses. You can't put all that into a walk-up song. You only have to pick a couple lines. It's a long song, of course, but, well, come to think about it, he had a lot to celebrate and a lot to sing about. One commentator called this David's valedictorian speech. I like that. He's trying to put a lot into 50 verses. And you too, if you were writing a song about your life, I got an idea it would be more than 50 verses. There's a lot that the Lord has done, right? One of the hymns that we sang last week was "To God Be the Glory, Great Things He Has Done." And that's what David is doing here. These 50 verses, you see God has done a lot, and he's giving God credit. I believe every person in this room has a song in them, a song of when God showed up and pulled you through. I'm kind of waiting for Joy's song, because this was the week of her remembering the anniversary of the wreck that nearly took her life. And I know there's a song there still simmering, but someday I want to hear that song. This is kind of David. Paul Harvey used to say, "Over my shoulder, a backward glance." He's reviewing something that he experienced. And that's what David's doing here. Over his shoulder, a backward glance. He remembers it was the hand of God that got him to this place in his life. And if you think about where you are right now in your life and all the stuff that you have been through, man, I'm looking out there and I know a bunch of your stories and places you've been and some of the stuff you've experienced, and you're here. You're here today because of the hand of God on your life. David didn't beat his chest and say, "I am the king. Look at all that I have accomplished." Other kings in the Bible have done that. "Look at all my hands have accomplished." David said, "Nope. God did this for me. He gets all the credit." David is skillful and he's smart, but he never graduated from the idea that I need you. Every hour I need you. So look how David starts his walk-up song. "I love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I call to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I am saved from my enemies." If you could train your eyes on the screen, or if you have your Bible open, you will see 7 magnificent descriptions of God. One is repeated, the term rock, but it's personal how he goes, my. It's my strength, my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. He's not some distant God, he's close. These 7 titles that he claims are given to God because David learned these things about God while he was on the run from a lot of enemies. And just like you've learned a lot about God and his faithfulness from the things that you've experienced in your life. I'm thinking David knew a lot about God before he was 20 years old. He killed Goliath before he was 20 years old. He was a shepherd in the field before he was 20 years old. There's a lot of stuff he learned about God and creation and animals and how God rules overall. Eugene Peterson rewrote the words of David. I thought they were worthy of sharing with you this morning. This is how Eugene Peterson took David's word and put them in his own. God is bedrock under my feet, the castle in which I live, my rescuing knight. My God, the high crag where I run for dear life, hiding behind the boulders, safe in the granite hideout. Man, that's some good and rich stuff. Does your walk-up song demonstrate that God is the top priority in your life? That's what needs to be asked on your way home from church. What is your walk-up song? What does your walk-up song say about you and the Lord? David believed in God. He thought about God. He imagined God. He sang to God. He prayed to God. It was 24/7 with him and God. Everywhere he looked, he said, God is like that. He's like that. Now, you've heard this song on TV probably. It's an advertisement, but it's a real song. Lainey Wilson has this song. It says, I've got a heart like a truck. It's been drugged through the mud. Well, it's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor. It's her song because her heart has taken a licking and kept on ticking somehow. You can tell from the lyrics of the song, she's been through something. It's not been easy, but it's like a truck. Maybe like some of the trucks in the parking lot that are a little bit muddy, a little bit rusty. They got a story to tell, and so does Lainey Wilson. Well, David is the king of metaphors. And I'd like you to try it now. I'm not going to fill in the blanks for you. I'm just going to throw these up here on the screen, and you say the word that comes to your mind. You can speak them out to your neighbor. It's cool. You don't have to be quiet about this. God is as dependable as whatever. Okay? God is stronger than
everybody in the world.
All right, Joe. He's sweeter than
Honey.
what do you got? The Bible would say honey. Yeah, David would say sweeter than honey. But you guys probably know something better than that. Like pie comes to mind for me sometimes. Just saying. He's more solid than, yeah, I was gonna, concrete, whatever. He's more reliable than
Taxes.
Yes. Thank you. He's more protective than, yeah. And so you're taking the place of David here and you're saying this is what he is to me. And your experience walking with the Lord helps you fill in these blanks. God is like that. One of the most frequently used metaphors that David gives us is that God was a rock. And at first that doesn't sound very complimentary. I mean, a rock doesn't have a personality. It's just there. It's common. The coach said, you guys are dumber than a box of rocks. Well, that doesn't help. I've heard that a few times in my life. In movie circles, when Hollywood says The Rock, they're talking about that guy, Dwayne Johnson. He's The Rock. And I'm thinking, you know what, that guy, yeah, he's strong, but he's really a pebble compared to the rock that David was referencing. David used rock as a firm foundation, a place of protection, something invincible. But make no mistake, his life was hard. He had been dragged through the mud. He was hunted by King Saul. He had many narrow escapes as are described in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. He says in verse 4, the cords of death entangled me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I cried out to God. He had been dragged through the mud, hadn't he? He had been through it. He had been chased. So we switch from the God who is, He's my shield, my rock, to what God does. He is in the rescue business. The word rescue is used 3 times in the 50 verses. It's vivid in his memory. He cried out and God came to his aid. I saw this week with my wife and grandson the new movie Guardian of the Galaxies. And spoiler alert, it's a rescue story. There's good guys and bad guys, and it's always good when the bad guys take it in the shorts. I always like that. So there's spoiler alert, you got that, okay? But the Guardians show up in the nick of time, and they're kind of underdogs, but they find a way in a hopeless situation, they find a way to make the rescue. And that's what happens to David. That's David's experience. He is in a bad place. The snares of death confront him. He cries out to God, and this is what happens when you guys pray. The power of God is unleashed. The real guardian of the galaxy shows up, and the earth shakes. It's like waking up a grizzly bear. Look out. He's coming. He likes me and he doesn't like you, and you're in big trouble. Well, Saul was the first king of Israel, and Saul was David's first hero, I believe. David would do anything for his king. He played the harp to soothe his troubled mind. You remember that story? He fought the giant to protect his king and his people. But eventually, David became close to Saul and his family. And as he grew in popularity, Saul became jealous. And this labeled David not a friend anymore, but public enemy number 1. This put him on the run. And yet all the while, David did not retaliate against his king. He was confronted by the snares of death, but he didn't retaliate. He just waited and let the Lord work this out. To him, God wasn't mysterious and distant. No, he was personal. He was present. He was protecting, and he was providing. When you think about the history of Israel, as you read through the Old Testament, the most talked about event in the Old Testament was the Exodus story from Egypt and walking through the Red Sea on dry ground. That is referenced many times in the Old Testament. And David relives that in his walk-up song. He reimagines what it was like to be there. Moses cried out to God, and God delivered Israel. And this is how David puts it in verse 16 through 19. He reached down from on high, and he took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but, another one of those biggest buts in the Bible, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because He delighted in me. We're going to go back to that. He delighted in me. Can you imagine today that the mighty God of heaven delights in you? What a thought. And David says, hey, it wasn't just in the past, in Moses' time, in the Red Sea time, in Egypt's time, but it's in the present with me. This is what He's done for me. And it's in the future. It's for you. This song is for you. This could be your walk-up song. Verse 21 through 25, we see David's story as the gospel story. God does for David what David can't do for himself. And Eugene Peterson said it's the story that gets completed in Jesus, the story of grace. We are blameless before him. Verse 23, he makes us clean. He settles our account. He cancels our debt because he delights in us. You wonder how this concept of grace and canceled debt wound up in David's walk-up song in the Old Testament before the cross. And all I can say is David is writing and singing more than he knows. Just like every time I open my mouth and try to tell the story of grace, I'm telling you more than I know, and I don't do it well. Just take a look at what happens when David cries out and God, the guardian of the galaxy, shows up. Look at what he enables him to do. Because I hear a lot of, I can't do that. I can't. You don't understand. I can't be, and you fill in the blank. You can't do it because of what? Well, it reminds me of Philippians 4:14. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. If you will try, he will show up. But look at what David says he can do in his terrible situation. Verse 29. I can advance against a troop. I can scale a wall. He sounds like Spider-Man. Man, he arms me with strength. He makes my way perfect. I like this one. Some of you guys will like this one. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. Woo! That means I'm out of here. If I need to get out of here, I'm getting out of here. He enables me to stand on the heights. Look at this one. He trains my hand for battle. He doesn't get you out of the battle. He trains you for battle. Stick in it. My arms can bend a bow of bronze. Well, there's some guys here that are bow hunters. They know you can pull back a bow of fiberglass, but bronze? Now wait just a minute. That takes a lot of muscles, and I don't have them. But God enables him to do even that. And look at verse 35. He sustains me. He stoops down to make me great. And then this in 38. I pursue my enemies. I crush them so they cannot rise. And then this surprising end in verse 43. You've made me the head of nations. People I don't know are subject to me. Like, dude, I show up and these people bow down before me. How did you put me in this spot? Do you know who I'm a shepherd. How did I get here? And so he's just saying, look at what God has done for me. In verse 46, the Lord lives and he lives in me. And he can do the same for you. Now, the other day, I met a man who grew up in a Muslim home in the country of Bangladesh. And through an amazing story, he became a follower of Christ. There's no way it should have happened except God. He became a follower of Christ. It was found out. And then came the arrests and prison and beatings and threats. He lived it. But like in verse 35, God sustained him and stooped down and made him great. And I sat there and listened to this guy, and I had to write it down because he told me the Lord has allowed him to plant over 100,000 home churches in Bangladesh, in Muslim communities. And only God knows how many people will be in heaven because of this unassuming man that God stooped down and made him great. I mean, I walked away from that guy with goosebumps. I can advance against a troop. I can scale a wall. You can. Now, this might shock you, but most of David's work was war and killing armies and subduing nations. David himself said that he was a man of blood, remember? He was a warrior who was just as comfortable with a sword in his hand as he was with a musical instrument in his hand. It's hard to handle that paradox. You got this guy who's praising the Lord and wiping out communities. It's hard. It's a hard world, and it's complicated. I just would say that we live in a fallen world, and I don't like it. And I wish this world would come to its senses. I wish that corruption would go away. I wish the whole issue of transgenderism would just disappear and I'd never have to think about it again. I wish everyone would vote like me. That's what I like. That's what I'd like. Man, what's wrong with people, right? And you say, we don't have to look too far to see what a culture of ungodliness has done to people. The innocent are proclaimed guilty, and the guilty are proclaimed innocent, and lying is just accepted now, and truth is mocked, and not working is rewarded, and churches have abandoned the scriptures. This walk-up song of David's could be our walk-up song today. Mercy was a foreign concept in David's world. He lived in a time of Canaanites and Philistines. David was familiar with bigamy and giants and swords. When the Canaanites and the Philistines showed up, their calling card was violence and idols and sex and complete annihilation of whoever they were after. There were no survivors. In the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw, Poland, in World War II, the ghetto that was built by the Germans to house in a segment of the city of Warsaw the population of Jews. They figured there was about 60,000 Jews there when they started out. By 1943, there were about 4,000 left, and they were being hunted. And such were the barbaric ways of Hitler and his armies. And that's the world where David lived. I mean, when the Philistines come, they're not going to spare the elderly or the children. They're taking everybody down. So David lived in a world like ours, and he cried out to God, and God showed up. I mean, we'll back up just a minute. David didn't know anything about fentanyl. He probably didn't care much about rising interest rates or inflation. But his southern border was a constant concern because that's where the Philistines came from. So he always had to be looking that direction. He did know about strong-willed children. He did know about complicated marriage issues. He lived in a fallen world much like ours. What to do about this? God was the center of his life in those times, just like he can be the center of our life in our times, if we will call out to him. You invite God into your world. That makes all the difference because it unleashes the power. The guardian of the galaxy shows up, and he's on your side, and he delights in you, and he's got your back. You can advance against the truth. You can scale a wall. You can experience an abundant life in this crazy world. That's what Jesus promised in John 10:10. You can know the hope to which you've been called. You can experience the riches of God's glorious grace in the saints. You can taste his incomparably great power for us who believe. He enables us to do that stuff. Okay, so David had a lot of rough edges. He made several questionable decisions, But I believe his story is put here in the Bible to show us that you don't become good and then you get God. It doesn't work like that. First, you surrender to God, and then over a lifetime, he trains you in his ways, and he shows you more and more what he can do with you as you give him more and more of yourself. So here's my simple outline of David's walk-up song. I encourage you to read Psalm 18 yourself. I couldn't include all the content in this message, but I would just say, here's a simple outline if you're interested. First is, who is God? And that gives you the metaphors. He's my rock. He's my shield. He's my fortress. He's my stronghold. And then the second idea is, how does he respond when I cry out? Well, he's the guardian of the galaxy. The earth trembles. He shows up. He stoops down to rescue you. And that leads to the last part. He enables you to do more than you can think on your own. So if you're contemplating doing something and you think you can't because, and you fill in the blank with your big because, you can't do it because, it is God who enables you to do it, and you should go for it. You should just go for it. Whatever it is that's out there in front of you. I know a lot of people will question you, say, what are you thinking? Why are you doing that? What are you doing? He enables you. You can go for it. So here's 3 things to take home. Joy, I can invite the worship team up as I close. I would encourage you as you read this to note the capital letters of Lord. Lord is in capital letters again in the scripture. Lord means the eternal one, the omnipotent, the omniscient, the omnipresent. He is the one who stoops for you. And then here's the second take home. He rescued me because he delights in me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. He loves you. He delights in you. And the cross proves that. And then the take-home is, with his help, I can, verse 29. Just look at all the things you can do. Now I wanted to share one last song with you before we sing. It's a song that I think is a walk-up song for the artist named Stephanie Gretzinger. This is her song. Perhaps you've heard it. She said, if my heart could tell a story, if my life could sing a song, if I have a testimony, if I have anything at all, then these lines. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. His faithful hand has led me all the way. And when I'm old and gray and all my days are numbered on the earth, let it be known in you alone my joy was found. That's a walk-up song. David could sing that song. So I'm asking you today about your walk-up song, and you just might need a new one. You might need to change your walk-up song from My Life Stinks to Look at What God Has Done. How crazy it is to do life on your own. How crazy to go through life without the rock, the fortress, the deliverer, the shield, the stronghold. Don't be that person. Humble yourself, cry out to God, repent, and turn to Him today.